Now, another thing that has become really quite significant is what space are we playing in? So there's the control and automation space, there's the business system space, and there's the design space. And where the sweet spot for smart manufacturing is, it's in between all of these. So we've heard a little bit about intersections and so forth today, but if you get in between these, there's actually a lot of headroom for opportunity here. And what we try to do is characterize these problems, or this headroom, if you will, in these three different areas. So the micro area is really the extension of the control systems and producing additional capability in the control system, additional modeling capability. This meso level is really the management of the operations. If I could just manage them better with the data, the models, and so forth, there's a lot of headroom to make, call it opportunity. And then if I do want to get into the supply chain level, there's the macro level that we're working with going forward. Now, one of the things that I will say here in the conversations with you is where industry is, with respect to smart manufacturing, it's very heavily in this micro and this meso level. The supply chain is all very, very interesting, and I think everyone has a great deal of interest in doing it. But if you really want to get at the production performance and so forth, you actually have to start there first. You have to understand what's happening within the individual plant sites going forward, and then you can begin to work in the supply chain space. So actually see that as a later stage. The other thing is supply chain interoperability. There's a lot of business things that need to be worked out. So we want to continue working these. So I'm in no way detracting from supply chain. I just want to say that it has to come along a little bit further, and there needs to be some experience base built up. At least that's what I'm hearing from you. So there can be some discussion around that. So enterprise thinking. Let me jump into the infrastructure piece around these kinds of practices. So one of the things then, we got into the business of what infrastructure really makes sense, and how can we accelerate the deployment of these systems? How can we actually start dropping these costs? How can we drive the deployment of these systems? And so the first thing I will say is the SM platform is enabling infrastructure. If you don't do the applications, you've done nothing. You actually have to think about the platform as a way to put these applications in a better way. But we started asking, what are the practices that are most important for industry? And so this starts driving, what does the user want to see? What does the provider need? And how do we match these together? So the first thing here, and I'll just go through them very quickly, certified app configurations. The word configuration is a bit of a vocabulary for us, because when we start talking about cloud services, software as a service is actually out there. It's a standard thing. There's no new news there. What has become very, very interesting is the notion of, if I have software as a service and I use it as a service and I use it for a particular application, can I capture it as, can I capture how that software was used? Can I capture it as a template and then reuse it in an actionable form? That's what we mean by a configuration. The notion of composing and reusing has been around, even since back in 2010. But that is extremely important. And I know we use the iPhone analogy, or the smartphone infrastructure analogy all the time, but it breaks down very, very quickly for manufacturing, because each one of those apps, that's in an Apple store or an Android store, they're individual apps, and they have everything kind of tied together. In manufacturing, you actually have to put different apps together and make those work into an overall system. So an iOS for manufacturing, I use this term kind of loosely, but it actually has a very, very important implication that we need to work through. The DevOps for manufacturing, so go into an IT term, but one of the things, and I was talking to Preston Holmes at Google just yesterday, so I'm going to repeat something I said at the SMLC meeting this morning. It's come out over and over again. You actually have two ways to build these systems, and they're complex systems. But the way Preston gave me this analogy, and I think it really brings it out. If you're going to build a car, one way to do it is to go build the wheels, and then go build the transmission, and then go build the engine, and take 5 or 6, 10 years to do that, and then you build the car. So it takes 10 years to actually get to the car, and in between, you don't have anything except parts. The other way to do it is to build a scooter, then build a bicycle, then build a motorcycle, then build a bigger motorcycle, then build your car. But at each step of the way, you've got something that is beneficial. So basically to a almost 100% from the discussions I've had, this latter approach is the way that you guys want to work, that all of you want to work. And so how do we get a DevOps kind of approach and use the platform to support that? So that's a very big thing that we're taking forward here. There's these other things now that the notion of data to applications becomes very, very large. That opens up a lot of opportunity. And then this last one becomes very significant for this institute. And I'll go into a minute because we've had many discussions with many of the platform providers that are out there. Keep in mind that when we started, platform was a word that was not being used that much. Now it's being used everywhere. Almost every commercial provider has a platform now. And so one of the things I'll talk about in a minute is that we have to narrow our focus to what this institute is really about. This last bullet kind of starts to get at that, and I'll expand. One is trusted data. So obviously we always talk about data being exchanged, but the data that we're talking about is the data about the applications, the data about the standards, the data about how these things were put into use. The question is, who owns that data? And this is the question that the Institute, I think, can play a very significant role. Obviously, everyone would like to have access to that data, but what we would like to do is manage it on behalf of the Institute. The second place is the marketplace. Again, marketplace is really significant. Obviously, it's an access or a way to get at resources, so absolutely no doubt about that. But the marketplace is actually a tool for visibility. So we can begin to make visible standards. We can begin to make visible data models. We can begin to make visible different elements that are of value to industry, both from a provider standpoint and from a user standpoint. And so this is actually one of the things the Institute can play a very big role in, and it makes for a much richer marketplace as we take this forward. And then the final thing here, end-to-end state services. We talk about workflow a lot within this institute, and I'd like to kind of step back on this for just a second. Workflow is everywhere. Everyone uses workflow. It's almost in everything. But what we kept seeing over and over again as we were talking to you is there was actually no workflow that extended across vendors. How do you actually put a workflow across different vendor products? How do you put a workflow together across different edge computing to cloud, back to other edge or different data sources and so forth? And so one of the things that the Institute is focusing its attention on is how do you actually put a construct together that allows you to think about an end-to-end service that allows you to maintain state, predict capabilities, gather the information across this, and so forth. This actually becomes a very interesting piece. So if I go back to a slide that we've used a lot, this is what took us down the path of cloud. This is what took us down the path of there's a very rich set of services that one can move into as opposed to software applications by thinking about cloud. And this actually opens the door to some really hard questions from an industry standpoint, because do I really want to put operating data in the cloud? And so one of the things the Institute, I want to just reinforce a really important point. One of the things we've done is opened up a lot of questions, and probably more questions than answers, about the SM platform. But one thing that we do have going into this application is we have some of the very first experiences of using the cloud for a manufacturing operation. So streaming data, doing computations, and actually making some operational decisions. There's a lot of heavy haul there for people to get comfortable, for these things to work, and so forth. But the experiences that we start this institute off with actually set the stage for some very significant work in this particular area that will provide significant capability. But if we think about cloud and we think about services instead of applications, and we start thinking about services around transformation configurations, around these transformations, we think about these services around different KPIs, quality, and so forth. There's actually a very, very rich space that we've opened up with what we've done so far in getting this institute off the ground. And I went ahead and listed the different industry sectors I've had deep dive conversations in putting these remarks together. So I'm basically just reflecting well over 100 discussions. So this is what a workflow looks like in sort of a cartoon fashion, much more complex than this. But I wanted to use this one just to kind of emphasize what we're talking about. So we need a construct of some sort, right, that allows us to go from on-premise to cloud to back and understand what's going on across that whole process. And we need that also to accommodate multiple data sources and multiple provider products, wherever they're going to come from. So how do you do that? So this is one of the things that we've been experimenting with for the past several years and have a good sense of how to start doing this. We don't have the sense of how to do it in full. There's lots of questions, but from an institute standpoint, we can really start digging into these questions. One of the things I wanted to center on or key on with this slide is right in the middle. There's data assets, the data model, and data configuration. And again, this is an oversimplification of what's going on. But the heaviest haul of any of these systems has to do with the data. How do you get this data? We use the word contextualize, but you got to select data, you got to filter data, you got to label it, you got to put the tags on. This is where all of the work comes into play. And one of the things that we're seeing over and over again as we talk with you is this part gets reinvented every single time, and it's a huge effort. So one of the things we have asked ourselves is, can you disaggregate some of these steps so that some of these are reusable, and you can actually then start building some of these capabilities up in a more progressive manner. So Doug, I'm channeling you now in a way. We really don't want to reinvent data filtering every single time. We really don't want to reinvent data this, data that every single time. We really would like to be able to focus on what the data model is, how we can grow that. And the data models in this room are all over the map. There is no set way to do this at the moment. So we need to get a handle on this and at least provide the support to grow this in the right way. And then you have to get the data right to get to the analytics, the modeling, and whatever you're going to do with this. We have seen over and over again that the workflow actually provides us, at least as we go out the gate, a good way of managing these different elements and to disaggregate and then keep things still straight. The other thing with these little arrows is we would like to be able to change things in and out. The development process on these things requires being able to try different things, develop. There's a trial and error, so how can we speed up that trial and error on the engineering of these systems? But if you can get this part going, now you get something that we've actually been able to show with the existing DOE project. If you can start reusing some of these data assets and these data models, you actually can start spinning up projects faster and faster. And we've actually been able to see this on the Praxair example, and we can see where this is going to be extremely beneficial on the General Dynamics example. And as we look at these other test beds that are crossing the line into SESME, we're seeing this particular capability extremely important. So spin up a project, and get those going faster, get those developed. And then once one's spun up, what do you do with it? You need to bring it back together again or put it into a system. And so we're putting some standards together that allows these things to be reassembled when they're ready to go into the next step of whatever the development of the operation is. And we can start using these configurations over and over again. And then finally, we have opened the door towards this virtualization kinds of ideas because the cloud has allowed us to begin experimenting with this. So you can think about location 1 and location 2, and you can start answering or start asking these sorts of questions. If I can build this particular model for location 1 and I change it and learn something new, how can I get it to location 2 more easily? And so the economics of this platform become enabling in that sense. So I'm really just trying to give you a flavor for some of the ideas we've talked about for a long time. So build a reference model, and the last thing I wanted to kind of leave you with is over time, when we first started this, no one was putting these kinds of reference architectures together and actually trying to run them. If we fast forward to today, as I said, there's lots of platforms out there that are running now. It is not our intent to compete with those. And so we've actually had discussions with many of the large commercial providers, and there is great interest now in how can we partner appropriately, to start doing these things, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We actually want to focus in on those things with which the Institute itself is the only one that can do that. And so that's actually the marketplace piece, this workflow as a service and these data applications. So this is my last slide, just kind of leave it with you. We have looked at the business and the practices of this, and what we're really saying here is you got to be able to identify the opportunity, you got to be able to use a DevOps approach, you got to start simple, and you got to deal with the workforce, all those need to come together, and then the red arrow is going down, you got to reduce risks, costs, and time. And so we've been building the platform around all of these operating parameters or these business practice parameters to take things forward. We've got the beginnings to show you how to do this, and where we can now go with an institute is to take these things forward in a much more accelerated manner. And the last thing I'll leave you with is there's more questions than answers right now, but there is huge opportunity to now shape this appropriately, both from a commercial standpoint and then from an institute standpoint.